Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz. This is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over 10 college football games for Saturday's Week 1 schedule on September 2nd. And if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, here we go. Here's Week 1 in college football. First up, we go to Bryant-Denny Stadium as Alabama, number 4 ranked Alabama, hosts Middle Tennessee. Bama is a 39-point favorite. Total is at 51.5. Now, this total opened up at 54.5. It's gone down a few points, I think, for good reason, but I still think there's value on the under here. You know, Alabama has to replace quite a bit offensively. We know they only bring back 5 starters to the team this season on offense, and you have to replace your quarterback in Bryce Young, your running back in Jahmyr Gibbs, 2 NFL first-round picks in the draft this year. I think, right now Alabama has a quarterback battle brewing. You have added the transfer from Notre Dame and Tyler Buckner, but it looks like Jalen Milroe is going to be he's a favorite right now to win the starting job. He played a few games last season with Alabama. He finished 31 of 53 passing-wise, 58.5% completion, about 300 passing yards, and a 5-3 touchdown interception ratio. I do think Alabama is going to be just fine offensively in this game and going forward, but I do think it could take a few drives to get going. And this Middle Tennessee defense is, it's a solid team. I mean, we got to remember Middle Tennessee upset Miami last year in Miami, and this is one of the better defensive units I think on paper going into the season in the Conference USA. The offense is where I have my concerns. I really don't think Middle Tennessee does anything offensively in this matchup. It's why you see Bama as a 39-point favorite, yet still a pretty low total at 51.5. I just don't think the Blue Raiders do much of anything. Nicholas Fatiato is the favorite to be the starting quarterback for this matchup. He played a few games last year with Middle Tennessee with mixed results. I think he'll be a decent option going forward for Middle Tennessee, but on the road in Alabama, I just don't think it's a good matchup for him. I think Alabama wins this game comfortably, but I think we see a low-scoring affair. Give me the under in Alabama, Middle Tennessee. Next up, we see Old Dominion taking on Virginia Tech. This one at 8 o'clock Eastern start time on ACC Network. Virginia Tech is a 16-point favorite. Total is at 47.5 points. Now, I wanted to talk about this game because it highlights something we see a lot of in Week 1 in college football, and that's the revenge game, the revenge spot we talk about a lot. And, last year it was a 20-17 win, upset win for Old Dominion the first week of this season against Virginia Tech. They were able to host the Hokies in that matchup, and, we don't usually see teams in the Conference USA host ACC opponents, so it was a big game for the program. But now you're going on the road at Virginia Tech, which is a very tough place to play. Virginia Tech has one of the best home field advantages, I think, in Power 5 football. And you're, Old Dominion, you're a very inexperienced team. You don't bring back a lot of production from last year's team, really on either side of the ball, especially the skill positions offensively, where the quarterback battle looks like it's going to be Grant Wilson at quarterback for Old Dominion, who, doesn't have any FBS experience, and he only had 5 passing attempts with Fordham last year in the FCS. So I am concerned there. I think Virginia Tech's defense really has a good day. The offense, you bring back for Virginia Tech your quarterback in Grant Wells, who obviously had a disappointing season last year, his first year as a Hokie, but I think he takes some strides this season. I know he's got a lot of talent. We saw him play at Marshall, and he played well there. I think Virginia Tech wins this game going away. I think they get their revenge game. They get their revenge blowout win at home. Give me the Hokies laying the points. Next up, we see West Virginia taking on number 7 Penn State. We're going to see the Nittany Lions as a 20.5-point favorite. Total is at 50. And this one's a 7:30 Eastern start time on NBC. I think Penn State's too much for West Virginia in this matchup. I mean, we don't see teams not named Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Clemson in the last 20 so years be able to replace their career-leading passer in a guy like Sean Clifford and still the next season be ranked going into the year 7th or in the top 10 in the AP polls. But that's just how good this Penn State team is all around. I think Drew Aller is a really good option at quarterback. He was the backup last year. He knows the system. He played 60 passing attempts last season, was successful there. You bring back Penn State, your leading rusher in Nicholas Singleton, over 1,000 yards rushing, about 7 yards per carry on the ground, 12 rushing touchdowns. This offense looks fine. The defense looks even better. I think it's one of the better defensive units in the Big Ten, which we know is already one of the best defensive conferences in college football. I think Penn State's going to have a great season this year. West Virginia, a lot of question marks going into the year. Obviously, quarterback is one of those. You lose JT Daniels, you got to replace him, and there's not really, there's a favorite in Garrett Green to win the job right now, but I do think we're going to see a few options, maybe get some starts as the season goes on. I don't think West Virginia's offense does much here, and the big concern for me for the defense for West Virginia is I think this is one of the weaker secondaries in the conference, in the Big 12 going into the season. We just talked about how I think Penn State's going to be just fine in the passing game with Aller. I do think we could see some explosive plays early in this game for Penn State, and you need those if you want to cover a big spread like 20.5 points. I'm going to take Penn State here, lay the points with the Nittany Lions. Next up, we see UTSA taking on Houston. This one's going to be a 7 o'clock Eastern start time on Fox Sports 1. We see UTSA as a small favorite on the road, total right around 60 points. Last year, this was one of the better games in the early non-conference schedule, and it's another revenge game here as Houston took down UTSA 37-35 in triple overtime last year. I expect this year's matchup to also be one of the better games on the board for Week 1, and I like UTSA in this matchup. I think they have the more experienced team as well as talented team, especially on offense. Frank Harris returned to quarterback for UTSA, had a great season with the Roadrunners in 2022, about 70% completion, 32 passing touchdowns, about 600 rushing yards on the ground, 9 rushing touchdowns, over 4,000 yards passing. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks already in the conference. This is their first year for UTSA in the AAC. I think they've got to be one of the favorites to win the conference, honestly, as not only are they great offensively, on paper, but they bring back 8 defensive starters. They look strong defensively as well. Donovan Smith is the new quarterback in Houston after Clayton Tune. He was, a great member of the Cougars for the last 5 years. Donovan Smith into the system. I think he works well with Dana Holgerson's system. I do think that it's going to take a few weeks to get going, and we also saw his decision-making was a little bit suspect last year. A 12-8 touchdown interception ratio at Texas Tech, not really what you want to see from your quarterback. He had a good completion percentage, but this is a really good UTSA secondary. I think Smith could have some issues early on. I expect a high-scoring game. I like the over in this one, but I'm also going to take UTSA here to win this one on the road and cover the number. Next up, we see Colorado taking on TCU. We see the Horned Frogs as a 20.5 point favorite, total right around 63.5 points, and we see this game 12 o'clock Eastern on Fox. This is the much anticipated first game for Coach Prime, Deion Sanders at Colorado. He brings in a lot of transfers, not a lot of returning production from last year's Colorado team, but a ton of transfers, including the quarterback, his son, Shedeur Sanders, who played at Jackson State with him last year, put up big numbers there. I think he puts up big numbers this season, mostly playing Pac-12 games against teams that we know the Pac-12 conference, not always defense first. This is a pretty high-scoring conference, especially the last couple of years. So I think Sanders has a good season stat-wise, but in this matchup, I don't really love it for him. The first game for Colorado with the new system, you're facing a TCU team that in the Big 12, another conference similar to Pac-12 that's not really always worried about defense. TCU's defense was very strong last year, holding opponents to under 30 points per game, and the secondary especially holding opponents to 55.3% completion and under 250 passing yards. It looks even better going into this season. And those numbers don't look amazing on paper, but that is the Big 12 conference where there's a lot of high-scoring teams. I think TCU is one of the better defenses going into this season. And I mentioned, Penn State, they lose Sean Clifford. It's not, often you see a team like that still be ranked in the top 10 in the AP polls. For TCU, you lose Max Duggan, who had, over 3,000 passing yards, 65% completion, 30-4 touchdown interception ratio, and yet still TCU is in the top 20 in the AP polls. I think because Chandler Morris, we got to remember, he actually beat out Max Duggan for the starting job last year going into the season. I think he's a talented quarterback. I think he'll be just fine in the system. I think TCU wins this game going away. I think Colorado goes on to have some decent moments this year in the Pac-12, but in the first game of the season, I don't really like their chances. Give me TCU. Next up, we see a late game between Sam Houston and BYU. We're going to see BYU a 19-point favorite, total right around 47. This game's going to be 10:15 Eastern on Fox Sports 1. Now, Sam Houston last year, very defense first. They only gave 21 points per game. They were strong against the run, giving up only 3.2 yards per carry. But their offense wasn't great, only 18 points per game. I would say they were pretty one-dimensional offensively. But the good news is for Sam Houston, they bring back that one dimension in their leading rusher, Zach Urbacek, to the team in 2023. Urbacek last year, 5.8 yards per carry on the ground, was certainly, I would say, their best offensive player, best offensive weapon. And he returns here along with the leading passer in Keegan Shoemaker, who only had a 46% completion percentage, but still is a game manager for this offense, knows the system, still had over 1,000 yards passing last year. And this Sam Houston team faces a BYU program that really struggled defensively last year, gave up right around 30 points per game. You know, it was a pretty tough schedule for BYU, but still giving up about 4.6 yards per carry on the ground, over 170 rushing yards per game. The secondary struggled down the stretch of the season. They didn't get a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So I wouldn't want to lay this many points with BYU. And, you know, BYU's offense should be fine this year, and they scored 30 points per game last year, but you still have to replace their quarterback in Jaron Hall. Keaton Slovis, the new quarterback in town, the transfer from Pitt. Last year had, you know, mediocre numbers, I would say, with the Panthers. I think he'll be fine in this BYU system, but it could take a few weeks to get really going, and I think this is too many points to lay against a live team in Sam Houston, a very good defensive team. Give me Sam Houston plus the points in this one. Next up, it's North Carolina and South Carolina. This one's 7:30 Eastern on ABC. We see North Carolina as a small favorite, 2.5 points. We see the total right around 64 points. Now, you know, we've seen these teams play 5 times since 2000, and in this series, South Carolina's 4-1 straight up and 3-2 against the spread. I think South Carolina, it's tough not to take the points here with the Gamecocks, as although North Carolina, I think, has the more talented playmakers offensively, and that includes their one of the Heisman Trophy favorites in Drake May at quarterback, I still think South Carolina can compete there offensively, and I think the Gamecocks have the better defense by far. You know, Spencer Rattler at quarterback for South Carolina, again, last year, I thought it was a bounce-back season for him. You know, his touchdown-interception ratio wasn't the best at 18-12, but still 66% completion and over 3,000 yards passing. I think he has a strong season for South Carolina, and I think it's going to be a close game, probably a high-scoring game as well. That's why we see the total right around 64 points. But in a game that could have overtime or, you know, just should be a close game in general, I want to have those points with the team that's been better against the spread in this series. So give me South Carolina plus the 2.5 points in this one. Next up, we see Cal and North Texas. This one, 4 o'clock Eastern on ESPNU. And we're going to see Cal as a 6.5 point favorite. Right around 54 points is your total. Now, we don't see North Texas be able to host Power 5 schools or Pac-12 teams very often, but we know the Mean Green moved up to the AAC this year, moving up in competition. So maybe some more games like this in the future for North Texas program. But, you know, in this matchup, I think North Texas has improved defensively on paper. Last year, this team gave up a good amount of points and yards per game, but I think they're better offense or defensively going into this season. Offensively, they're experienced at the running back position. They bring back a few of their leading rushers from last year's team. I think the quarterback play will be better for North Texas this season as well. And, you know, Cal, last year, one of the weaker teams in the Pac-12. Their offense was not great, only 24 points per game. They only ran the ball for 3.6 yards per game and fewer than 100 yards per game on the ground. They lose their starting quarterback in Jack Plummer, who, you know, had over a 62% completion percentage, over 3,000 yards passing. It's a lot of replacement in week 1 on the road in a tough environment. To me, I wouldn't want to lay points with Cal in this spot on the road. I think North Texas is going to be way up for this game. Give me the Mean Green plus the points. Next up, we see Ball State and Kentucky. This one, 12 o'clock Eastern on the SEC Network. We see Kentucky as a big favorite here, laying 26.5 points, total right around 50 points. I think we see a very boring, low-scoring game. I like the under here. I think Kentucky wins it. I don't know if they cover the spread. I think they win it comfortably. But, you know, Kentucky last year, even though they had a lot of NFL talent offensively, guys like Will Levis at quarterback and Christopher Rodriguez at running back, they still only scored 20 points per game because their offensive line was one of the worst in the SEC and really one of the worst in Power 5 football. And, you know, this year you lose Levis, you lose Rodriguez, you bring in the transfer in Devin Leary, who personally I just wasn't wowed with his game at NC State. I know his numbers were decent on paper, but I just don't know if he's going to fare too well in an SEC team, you know, for an SEC team facing really tough defenses almost every week. This matchup, he should be fine. And Kentucky, like I said, should still win the game comfortably. But Ball State, even though the MAC is not known for its defense, that's for sure, I think it's one of the better defenses in the conference going into the year. So, you know, I think Kentucky wins and scores, you know, 30-plus points, but doesn't really go crazy offensively. Ball State, I do think, struggles quite a bit on the offensive side of things. You know, Lane Hatcher, the transfer from Texas State at quarterback, not really in love with his game. I do think it's going to take a few weeks for Ball State to get going offensively. Usually a program that's really more concerned with the conference matchups in the MAC than it is in non-conference play. I think Kentucky, you know, very strong defensive line going into the year, one of the better defensive lines in the SEC. I think they really stop Ball State from running the football. I don't think Lane Hatcher has too much success in the passing game. I think we see a low-scoring, mistake-ridden football game. Good amount of turnovers. I wouldn't be surprised. Give me the under here. Next up, we see Akron and Temple. It's going to be a 2 o'clock Eastern start time on ESPN+. Temple, a 9.5 point favorite, total at 56 points. Now, unlike the last game, I think we're going to see not a lot of defense played here. I like the over in this one. I think when you look at both of these teams, especially on the defensive line, I think these are two of the weaker defensive lines in their respective conferences. I talked about how the MAC conference last game, I talked about how Ball State was one of the better defenses in the MAC. I think Akron's one of the weaker defenses right now on paper in the conference, giving up last year over 30 points per game and over 400 yards per game. I think Temple will have its way in the passing game with E.J. Warner. Last year, really successful season, over 60% completion percentage, over 3,000 passing yards, 18 touchdowns. This has been a Temple team that in the last few years has really struggled offensively, but took the next step in 2022. I think they take even further a step in 2023. Akron has one of the better quarterbacks in the MAC conference in DJ Irons. Not only can he beat you through the air when he had 2,600 passing yards last year, but also added around 300 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns for the Zips on offense. I don't think either of these teams make too many stops in the run game. I think the defensive lines are really weak here. I like the over. I think we see explosive plays, some bomb plays, maybe 50, 60-yard rushing touchdowns or passing touchdowns. Give me the over here in Akron Temple. And that's it. Those are the games for Saturday in college football. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your college football picks in the comment section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.